lever, bowling to Stackpole.
It is February 1971. Australia and England are locked in battle for cricket's famous Ashes. England holds a 1-0 lead in the series. Australia has to win the final test match to retain the Ashes. However, Australia has not won any of its last 10 test matches.
I think there could be criticism of my batting because you're in the side to make runs, but I still think I'm the best captain in Australia, and I think the selectors probably think this also.
I should have woke up if something was on, because Sam Watson was one of the selectors with Harvey and Bradman at the time, and Sam was a Victorian. When I went to see Sam, he'd caught the 6 o'clock plane back from Adelaide, which I thought at the time, that's strange.
So I pick up the phone and it's Alan Shield, writing for the news in those days. And Alan says, "Congratulations, mate." I said, "What on, Sheffield?" He said, "You're captain of Australia." I'll never forget. I said, "Shit, you're joking." He said, "No, they've sacked Laurie and you're captain of Australia."
I just would have thought after 25 tests that maybe a Bradman would have said, "Look, you're going to miss out tomorrow."
And when I got home that night, I said to my wife at the time, Kay, I said, I walked in the door and she said, "Congratulations," or something or other. And my response was, "The bastards will never get me like that."
The birth of what would become known as the Chappell era had its genesis in Bill Laurie's demise as Australia's captain. Ian Chappell was an aggressive batsman whose leadership qualities would inspire loyalty from his team and transform Australia's approach to playing cricket in the 1970s. The mood for change and the changing values of the wider society at that time was soon mirrored in the cricket world. There was universal restlessness amongst the game's elite players. No longer were they prepared to just be seen and not heard. Ian Chappell's preparedness to stand up to the establishment on behalf of his players would ultimately bring profound changes to the game of cricket, both in Australia and beyond.
To me, the big problem was that the board, and I'm talking only now the Australian Cricket Board, they didn't sit down with the players and say, "Look, there's obviously some sort of problems here. Can we get to the bottom of it and try and come to some sort of a compromise?" But they just put themselves in that corner, and I guess eventually they found a group who were prepared. You might say were looking for a fight, and so we locked horns.
The seeds of player discontent that would ultimately grow into the World Series cricket revolution by the late 1970s were initially sown during Australia's arduous 5-month double tour of India and South Africa during the summer of 1969-70, under the captaincy of Bill Laurie.
It was a great challenge. It was probably the toughest tour without doubt I've been on. And thankfully we played very well. Some wonderful performances, like guys like Chappell and Doug Walters and Mallett and Mackenzie were magnificent. So there are very pleasant memories on the field there, but very unpleasant memories from the accommodation, the type of travel, the food we were getting, and the lack of support we were getting from the Australian Cricket Board on a dual tour.
The accommodation that we stayed in, you wouldn't let a pig loose there. We were fortunate enough, we were the last side to win India, and when you look back you just wonder how, because the meals that we ate and the food that we were given.
Probably the catalyst to the whole thing was the fact that we weren't staying in the best hotels in India. Now, that was very, very annoying to a lot of the players. And we put that down to the Australian Cricket Board.
We used to carry some tinned fruit and some Fosters around with us, and that was virtually your dinner and that. And one of the guys one night said to someone, "Why don't go down the fridge and get a couple of those, some Fosters or some tinned fruit or something, bring them up." And he went down to the fridge, and here's this refrigerator door open in the kitchen area, and here's 3 or 4 cats in there on all the food and that we were served up for breakfast and all that. So, it wasn't the best of conditions.
The players coped with these appalling conditions, volatile crowd behaviour, riots and concerns over personal safety to win the series 3-1. Bill Laurie's team is the last Australian side to win a test series in India.
We won the series in India, and I've always felt that, we won that series. People say, "Oh, how could you win the series?" And I said, well, because we had batsmen who could play spin bowling. And we always believed we could win the series because we could make enough runs, even though we were facing terrific spinners on pitches that turned a lot.
After 10 weeks in India, the Australians flew straight to South Africa to begin a 4-test series against a strong Springbok side captained by Ali Bakar. Fatigued and debilitated by their experiences on the subcontinent, the weary Australians were no match for the powerful South African combination and suffered the heaviest defeat ever inflicted on Australia in a test series.
They'd taken the Australian players from slow turning tracks in India, batting against 3 spinners of great quality, to faster seaming tracks in South Africa, and they'd given them a couple of weeks to practice. So that's a fair idea of the organisational capabilities of the cricket administrators at the time. And the Australians were beaten 4-0 in South Africa.
We dropped 16 catches in 4 test matches in South Africa, and I'm sure that was due to guys like Sheehan and Chappell. The great fieldsmen were dropping straightforward catches, and I'm sure that was just because of mental, physical fatigue, not of ability at all.
I've always said that South Africa were a better side than us, but I'll never believe, I'll go to my grave believing that they were not a 4-0 better side than us. And I guess some of the angst that had built up in India carried on into South Africa. And I'm talking now about the angst with the board.
The South African Cricket Board wanted to play an extra test. I think they suggested that after it had just been flogged in the first test. So they wanted to do, and a 4-test series seemed an odd number in those days anyway. So I'm a little surprised that it wasn't 5 in the first place. But the South African board wanted to put on a 5th test.
This is where we had them over the barrel. What they also had to do, to give us a bit of time in between the test matches, they had to extend the tour. So it meant that the tour went 3 days longer than what we'd signed our contract for.
So the contract had to be rewritten, which meant that they had to pay the players extra. And when it came up at the team meeting, Ian Chappell suggested $500 would be a correct figure for the 11 players taking part, and then they'd share it right round the team. The board offered $200, which was $20 more than the Australians would get for playing a test match in Australia.
Because that was outside our contract with the board for that tour, the players had a right of choice. Now, I think the South Africans wanted to up the ante that the Australian Board of Cricket wanted to give us, but our beef wasn't with the South African Cricket Board, it was with the Australian Cricket Board.
I said, listen, this is our opportunity. We're not going to get too many chances to stand up to the board and let them know that we're not going to be pushed around. I said, for Christ's sake, let's not agree to this.
So that was probably the first time that the players had the right to stand up to the board and say, well, if you don't pay us what we want, then we're coming home. We're not playing that 5th test. As it turned out, it was probably a blessing in disguise. 5-0 sounds a lot worse than 4-0, doesn't it?
I got myself in a lot of strife on that tour because I wrote an official letter back to the board saying what we shouldn't do in the future. Like we shouldn't travel to India unless we're in first-class hotels, and we shouldn't do this and do that, and I think they took exception of that.
I wouldn't think Bill did himself the slightest bit of good by putting in a report to the Australian Cricket Board critical of the board and of those circumstances where South Africa won the extra match and there was discussion about players' payments, and Bill was very much a players' man.
As far as I'm concerned, that was the end of Bill Lawry as captain of Australia. Once he put that letter in, then it was just a matter of finding any excuse they could to get rid of him.
First ball of the after-tee adjournment or after-tee runs 2 straight away, and out it goes to mid-off. There's 2 more to Chappell. He's coming up for his 50. That's 50 to Greg Chappell. Greg Chappell in his first test match. Not out 50, Redpath not out 111. Australia 5 for 242.
During the summer of 1970-71, Australia played host to England in a series that produced a number of firsts. For the first time, an Ashes series was extended to 6 tests to accommodate the first ever test match played in Perth in December 1970. The match is also significant, for it heralded the long-awaited debut of 22-year-old Greg Chappell.
It took me, I'm told, 48 minutes to get off the mark. It didn't seem that long for me, but I'm told my family and friends thought it was a very long time.
Greg took forever to get to 50. He really had to battle hard. I mean, Snowy was bowling well. Battled hard to get to 50. Then suddenly he got to 50 and the runs really came quickly. I remember he got into the 80s and Bill Lawrie started jumping up and down saying, get your head down, don't throw it away, you've got 100 on debut here. And I said, Bill, settle down, this is the way he plays, you know, he's good at those shots, he's not going to throw it away.
Of course, apart from the fact that we've got a record crowd here, we've probably also got the biggest television audience in Australian cricket history watching this performance. Shuttleworth again to Greg Chappell, and he's hooked it, it's going to be safe. D'Oliveira's coming in, he could catch him, now it's in front of him.
When the ball was in the air, I can remember thinking as I took off for the first run, oh, what a shame to have gone this far and mess it up with a shot like that, but thankfully, as I say, it was so bad it didn't carry.
1970-71 saw the ABC provide ball-by-ball television coverage of each day's play live around Australia for the first time. People everywhere were on the edge of their seats as Greg Chappell approached his maiden Test century.
That was very, very close to the stump. Very, very close as it came back in over the top.
I remember the flack that the ABC copped over Greg's 100 because apparently they went to the news when he was in the late 90s.
You can imagine what must be going through his mind. The player making his first appearance in a Test match, and of course against England. Shuttleworth bowling to Chappell. And he'll get it there, he'll get 2 runs, this is his 100, he's coming back for 2, and the boys are coming from everywhere. Greg Chappell scores 100 in his first Test match, the first innings of his first Test, and look at these kids, there's thousands of them. There's literally thousands of them tearing out onto the ground. The umpires have had to come in to protect the bails, and somewhere in the middle of that milling throng is Greg Chappell.
I was engulfed by spectators, and I think I was grateful for the support, you know, just to hold me up at that stage. I remember being sort of caught in this melee of people and being grateful that they came out and I guess gave me a bit of time to compose myself and get back on with it, although I didn't last much longer after that.
The traditional Boxing Day Test in Melbourne produced more firsts. After 3 days of continuous rain, it became the first Test match in Australia to be officially abandoned without a ball being bowled.
I mean, that was a very wearying match for Keith Stackpole and I, because we'd tossed and then we won the toss and put us in, and we sat there for about 3 days with the pads on because it was almost a stop-start situation. The umpires are going out, no, we're not going out. It was a very stressful 3 or 4 days if you're a top-order batsman.
To appease the disappointed crowds and recoup some of their financial losses, the cricket authorities decided to stage a one-day, 40-over-per-side exhibition match. One-day cricket had been played at the domestic level in English county cricket since 1963. But thanks to Melbourne's inclement weather, history was made at the MCG on January 5th, 1971, when the first one-day international was played between Australia and England in front of 46,000 people.
It was quite extraordinary to us that all these people would turn up for a one-day game at the MCG. We knew the Vics were mad on their sport, but I suppose they'd been deprived of their Boxing Day Test match, so they turned up in great numbers.
I don't think this will be a catch. Yes, he is getting under it, and well caught by Greg Chappell.
I think it was just an interesting sidelight more than anything else. I don't think there was any great feeling of history being made that this was the first of a new form of cricket that was going to make such an impact on cricket in the next 10, 15 years. It was more, well, this will be interesting.
Basically, that's, I think, how the players treated it at that point as a bit of an afterthought. You know, I mean, you always go out there and try to play as well as you can, but it wasn't the same as playing in a Test match.
There was no real thought given to field placings. The game was just played as a normal game of cricket, although the bowlers were limited by the number of overs they were bowled. Nobody knew much about the tactics.
Lever bowling. Here's some runs, that's 4 runs. Marsh 10, Australia 5 for 191. That is the end of the match.
England won the fourth Test in Sydney thanks mainly to a couple of the most controversial figures in English cricket during the 1970s, Geoff Boycott and John Snow. Boycott, a dour opening batsman from Yorkshire, amassed 657 runs during the series at an average of 93.85. And Snow, a fiery opening bowler from Sussex, took 31 wickets in the series, including a match-winning 7 for 40 in the fourth Test.
John Snow was the best opposition fast bowler that I ever played against. That baggy green cap used to get Snowy bloody excited and make him bowl better. But he was a terrific competitor, and he played a huge part in England winning in 70-71, and I mean Ray Illingworth used him extremely well.
By the time the teams met again in Sydney for the final Test of the series, Bill Lawry was gone and Ian Chappell was captain of Australia, a choice apparently not favoured by everyone.
I was having a drink with Alan McGilvray, and McGilvray, who I knew had some pretty close contacts with board members, and McGilvray told me that a board member had told him that Ian Chappell would never captain Australia because of the blow-up in South Africa.
Trouble was also brewing in the England camp. The third Test washout led to an extra Test being rescheduled in Melbourne between the Sydney and Adelaide Tests, thus extending the series to 7 matches.
We nearly had a strike in Melbourne, as you probably know, with the Test match there, when we were told to play an extra Test match and nobody had sort of said anything about money. You know, we just got told you're playing an extra game, you know, thanks very much. I think Sir Don came in the dressing room and said, you know, thanks very much for agreeing to play the game, lads, and that was the first we knew about it.
And something to be told, well, you've got 5 tests in 6 weeks after Christmas through February time, hottest time of the year. And I said, hang on, if we get anybody injured, and Alan Ward had already gone home injured, we're going to be very short. The Aussies can call on people around the country, which is a bit easier.
When the likes of Gubby Allen and Sir Cyril Hawker and Donald Bradman sat down together with David Clark, our tour manager, with no buy nor leave to the captains of either country, and decided to play another Test match when Melbourne got washed out, was a sort of taste of things to come 7 years later.
I said, number one, they're not happy with it. Number two, are you going to pay them anything for it? Oh, they're under contract. I said, no, they're not under contract to play 7 Test matches. I said, that's what you're asking now.
I think that the tour fee for 1970-71 for the whole tour is probably £750 for the best part of a 5-month tour of Australia and New Zealand.
And eventually we got £25 for playing that Test match. So the boys weren't happy about that, and I had great difficulty in keeping them on board, kind of thing, at that time, because they were all very angry about it all.
Off the field, player frustration with their treatment by the game's administrators would continue to grow and fester over the next few years. On the field, matters came to a head in more ways than one, when Australian tail-end batsman Terry Jenner was felled by a rising delivery from England paceman John Snow.
As I got across, the ball started to follow him back in, and I sort of ducked and turned. I think if I'd stood erect to play the ball, it probably would have been here somewhere. It certainly wasn't stump height.
Terry got very, very low. The ball would, in fact, I think we did shout for LBW. It would barely have cleared the top of the stumps.
The thing about it was it hit my head and rebounded to cover. I mean, it wasn't exactly a glancing blow.
I couldn't understand why he didn't want to run for 2. I mean, I called him through.
And then, of course, Lou Rowan immediately warned me, said that's one warning to the captain. You must be joking, you know, words to that effect, probably a bit more Anglo-Saxon, and, you know, whose side are you on anyway, for God's sake, type of thing.
I'm a backer of Illingworth's, but he was behaving not like an England captain, but more like the prima donna of a South American football side, arguing with the referee.
I got taken for doing this to Lou Rowan, when all I was saying is bowl 1 bouncer, if you call it a bouncer. Under what law are you on him? Law 46 for persistent and intimidating bowling for 1 short ball? I said, you can't do that.
And of course, from the outer, that looks as though he's got his finger out and he's saying, what, you know, what the hell's going on, type of thing.
As he grabs his sun hat from umpire Rowan and now asks the crowd to keep in time with their chanting. John Snow going away towards the Paddington Hill end, and some of the cans, the first of the cans, are being thrown onto the ground at the Paddington Hill end.
No plastic bottles in those days, they were the real Jimbo, these ones.
Snow comes down to say hello to some of the fans at the Paddington end. Now look at this. One of the drunken ones grabs him, tries to assault him now, pulls him into the fence, and Snow tries to pull away. The spectator is pulled away by his friends, and Snow goes away, followed by beer cans that are being thrown at him.
I sort of toyed with the idea of hitting him. Again, decided against it. And he'd had a couple of drinks, I think.
With the safety of his players paramount, England captain Ray Illingworth decided to take his team from the field.
And I remember looking around thinking, well, what happens here? I hadn't had a great deal of experience of opposition teams walking off, but in the back of my mind I had this sort of thought that the last team in possession is probably going to win, so we might as well stay here.
I turned to the team, I said, Christ, I hope they forfeit, because this is my first game as a captain. I'll take a win any way I can get it.
There then ensued yet another row with David Clark, the manager, who said, you've got to get back out there, otherwise, you know, we'll forfeit the game.
An announcement from the Secretary of the Border Control said that there would be no further play until the ground was cleared, both of spectators, given a helping hand here by the constabulary, and bottles and cans which were picked up, some by spectators and some by the ground staff. The England players came out again, led by Illingworth, this time to a mixture of hoots from the hill and a lot of applause from the member stand.
Eventually, Australia was set the modest target of 223 to win the match, level the series and retain the Ashes. The task was made easier when John Snow injured his hand on the picket fence and was unable to bowl. However, England refused to lie down. Leading from the front, Ray Illingworth claimed 3 vital wickets.
Is he caught?
Redpath.
Yes, he's out.
Stackpole.
And appealed to court, and he's bowled. He's bowled.
And Greg Chappell.
Stumped. He's out. Yes.
Australia was dismissed for a mere 160, and Illingworth became the first captain of England to regain the Ashes on Australian soil since Douglas Jardine in the infamous 1932-33 Bodyline series.
That was decided. We bowled them out 8 times, I think it was, under 300. And yet all those first 6 that played for them scored 5,000 test runs. That's a lot of test runs.
The 1970s saw politics and sport become a volatile mix on the world stage. During the Australian winter of 1971, the South African rugby tour of Australia was marred by hostile anti-apartheid demonstrations. The disruption caused by the protesters during many of the matches was of such concern that the proposed South African cricket tour of Australia during the summer of 1971-72 was placed in jeopardy.
Anti-apartheid leaders, wishing the visitors all kinds of ill fortune, made it obvious that making the game unpleasant was only part of the plan.
South Africa's path to international sporting isolation had been sparked by what became known as the D'Oliveira affair. Basil D'Oliveira, a Cape-coloured cricketer from South Africa, was denied the right to play for the country of his birth. He moved to England and qualified to play Test cricket for his adopted country. Despite scoring 158 against Australia in the 5th Test at the Oval in 1968, the England selectors left him out of the MCC team scheduled to tour South Africa in 1968-69. When an original selection, Tom Cartwright, withdrew from the squad because of injury, D'Oliveira was named as his replacement. South Africa's Prime Minister, John Vorster, responded by withdrawing the MCC's invitation. The tour was cancelled.
An outcry because a certain gentleman of colour was omitted on merit by the MCC selection committee. From then on, sir, D'Oliveira was no longer a sportsman, but a cricket ball.
Well, I think it's a tragedy for cricket that this has happened. Probably didn't want it this way, but the game itself is going to suffer insofar that probably 2 of the greatest cricketing countries of the world will not be playing in a series. This is a great tragedy that's come out of all of this.
The team as constituted now is not the team of the MCC. It is the team of the anti-apartheid movement.
In Britain, Anti-apartheid demonstrations and disruptions caused by pitch invasions during the 1969 Springbok Rugby Tour led to the cancellation of the South African Cricket Tour of England in 1970. A prominent anti-apartheid activist who organised the successful campaign was Peter Hain.
I would like to see sport played according to its true principles, and it's not being played according to its true principles by white South Africans. It's being played on a racialist basis, where a black man, however good he may be in a sporting sense, is excluded.
It got right into the heart of the political issue of apartheid, but it did so via the back pages of the newspapers, to ordinary sports people who never thought about the politics, who probably, frankly, are the majority of citizens. And I understood that, because in a sense I was one of them.
I got behind Peter Hain in a fashion, not necessarily got behind him in a way that he went about it, but I always thought that having a go at South African sport would be more effective than having a go at them in most other fashions.
The key thing that I think we brought, the demonstrators, Peter McGregor and others who organised the campaign of the Australian anti-apartheid movement, and we brought and we pioneered in Britain, and I suppose was my idea originally, was non-violent direct action, Gandhian type techniques of running onto the pitch, sitting down, disrupting the match, using flashing mirrors and that kind of thing in the case of cricket matches, blockading the team as it was leaving its hotel into the hotel and preventing the start of the match. Those kinds of things, non-violent but militant action, is what fundamentally changed things, because when the events couldn't happen anymore, they had to stop them.
In the light of the policy of the ACTU in regard to apartheid, that we advise our affiliated unions to take whatever action is necessary as an act of conscience on their part to withhold their services from any activities directly associated with the proposed visits of these teams.
The South Africans might be able to enter the country and they might be able to find somewhere to stay, but it's certain that they couldn't play any cricket if the ACTU declared the cricket ovals black. There'd be no ticket sellers, there'd be no food supplies for the caterers, there'd be no groundsmen and no attendants. And all this would be quite apart from the noisy demonstrations that would follow the South Africans wherever they went.
There were tens of thousands of people involved right across the globe, and including in Australia, proud of what we did, because we hastened the end of apartheid. And I'm not just saying it myself, Nelson Mandela, when he came out of prison, told me that.
Eventually, the South African Cricket Tour of Australia was cancelled. In its place, a series was organised against a multiracial rest-of-the-world side, captained by the great West Indian cricketer Gary Sobers.
My whole idea was to go to Australia and have one more year with South Australia, a place where I had a couple of very good seasons, and I was looking forward to just going back at the end of my career, just to play a season with them and just to get out of cricket. And Sir Donald Bradman, who was a very good friend of mine, he seized that opportunity and he got in contact with me personally and had asked me to captain the team.
It was a terrific series. Some good things came out of it for Australia. I guess the three players really came of age in Marsh, Greg and Denisuli, and that order is chronological. I'm not trying to put them in any order on ability. That's the order they came into the Australian side. But the big thing, and probably the most important thing for the team, I think, was Denisuli.
For Gary Sobers, his first sighting of the 22-year-old tearaway in action would make a lasting impression.
I'll never forget when I first saw him in the first test in Brisbane, and he walked back to his mark, and I was standing up just outside the dressing room by a little tent, and Lindwall was there, and because Lindy and I was very good friends, and I said to Lindy, I said, why is he walking, why is he going that far back? And Lindy just looked at me, said nothing, and after he bowled the first ball, I look at Lindy to say, I see why he's gone that far back. Seeing Lily for the first time, and he had such a nice run up and such a nice action and fluency that he looked tremendously quick, especially on a Brisbane wicket. You know, and that day right away cast my thoughts to Perth, because I knew what he would be like in Perth.
Lilly to bowl to Cavasco. We've got an appeal for caught behind. He's out. And an amazing shot. He's caught and bowled. Great catch. Brilliant catch by Lilly.
Caught. Yes, a magnificent catch by Stackpole. A superb catch by Stackpole. Greg is out.
I remember walking out to bat, and I looked back, and Rodney Marsh was standing about nearly 25 yards back, and so was Ian and those. And I turned to Ian and says, "What are you all doing back here?" And Marsh, he said, "You'll find out."
Well, anyone who was going to confront the greatest cricketer I've ever seen, you know, obviously it's one of apprehension.
Now here's his first ball, Lilly bowling to Sobers.
I said to myself, wonder what the hell has Donald brought me into? And the next one I gloved.
Lilly bowling to Sobers. Caught. Yes, he's out. Caught by Marsh, and Sobers is out for a duck, and the World 11 are 6 for 46.
After about 4 overs, I think, I went to Ian and I said, "Look, I just don't feel well. I'm feeling crook. I think I might have had a virus or something, and I didn't feel that well. Maybe it was the 12 Weet-Bix that I had for breakfast. I'm not sure, but I really didn't feel that well." And I think he said, "Give me one more." And I think in that one, I then got a few wickets. And then he couldn't get the ball out of my hand.
Could be caught. He's out. He's caught. It was a great catch by Mackenzie. Hutton out for a duck. And Lilly has now taken 5 for 29. Could be caught. He's going to be caught. Yes, Sheehan has caught him. Caught. He's out. Caught by Stackpole. Cunis caught Stackpole. Bowled Lilly for no score. And that was very close to the edge. He's out. He's caught. Lloyd has been caught by Marsh off the bowling of Lilly for 14. And the World 11 are all out for 59, and Dennis Lilly has finished with the amazing figures of 8 for 29 from 7.1 overs. Dennis Lilly, 8 for 29 from 7.1 overs.
It was something special to see him thundering in, and I think, you know, we knew that we had a real live one there in Lilly, because apart from anything else, he was so wild and he had hair going everywhere. I bet he wished he could say that now.
I felt comfortable that I was part of the team once I got that 8 for. More than, you know, great, there's an 8 for, you know, isn't that brilliant? It was more the fact that I now felt that I was contributing to the team, that I felt part of the team. I think that was terrific for me mentally.
The World 11 was forced to follow on and faced an innings defeat. In addition to all of their on-field dramas, there were some off-field dramas of a different kind, occupying the minds of some team members.
Now, this team, remember, was made up of some West Indians, some South Africans, some Englishmen, and also some Pakistanis and some Indians. And war broke out between Pakistan and India right in the middle of that tour.
As West Indian veteran Rowan Kanhai approached his century, in the dressing room, not everyone's attention was focused on what was happening out on the field.
It was the first time I saw the two sides, the Indian side and the Pakistan side, gathering in corners to listen to radio and get news back about the war that was taking place in between Pakistan and India. You've got the engineers of this world, Gavaskar, you know, all absolute heroes. And then you've got, on the other side, Asif Iqbal, along with Majid and Intikab, and all have these little discussions separately. But that evening, we'd be in the team room together, and all the greatest of mates. And a war's going on at home. You know, it's an incredible example of how sport can break down politics.
The World 11's on-field woes continued in the next match in Melbourne. On the first morning, they were reeling at 4 for 26. Gary Sobers out, first ball to Dennis Lilly for a golden duck.
I had had a pretty lean season up to then, and every time I walked into bat, Dennis had seemed to present me with these short pitch deliveries, and I was getting a little bit fed up of it.
There was a few short ones mixed in there, and he probably felt I was maybe having a go at him. I was just running in and bowling as fast as I could and hoping to get wickets.
The worst thing you can do is upset a good player. I've always felt that you try and keep it calm with a good player, and obviously this had got up Gary's nose a little bit, and he decided that he was going to do something about it.
I went in the dressing room that evening to sit next to Ian. I went to carry a message so that Dennis can hear, and I sit next to Ian, and I said, Ian, you got a man in here called Lily. You know, I was getting back to the old days when they used to call cricketers by their surname. I said, you got a man in here called Lily, and every time I go into bat, I seem to be getting these short pitch deliveries. I just want you to tell him, or to let him know, that I can bowl short, I can bowl quick, and I can bowl bouncers too. So you better watch out for me when he came in.
Lily batting. There you are, Gary Sobers defying the law of understanding between fast bowlers. Dropping one short to Lily.
And then just looked at me down the wicket and said, I bowl him well too.
And by this time, Dennis turned completely pink. So I thought to myself, well, I've got him. So I ran up the next ball and took the weight off, and Dennis had one big swing.
He's hit him hard and high. Beattie is getting under it, and he's caught.
So at the end of the day's play, I walked back into the dressing room again with a big smile on my face. And Ian said to me, what are you so happy about? I said, well, I'm your friend. I mean, if I can't come in here and have a smile with you, something is wrong. He said, well, I'm going to tell you something. He said before Dennis could reach the dressing room, just as he was coming up the steps, as this door opened, the bat hit the wall. And he said, that little bastard, I will show him. I haven't really bowled at him yet. I said, well, Ian, you know, he's got the ball. I've got the bat. We'll see.
And where's that going? Out towards the boundary again. 4 more. Where's that going? Towards the boundary. It will beat every fieldsman. It's slowing down. Jenner's after it. It's going to be close. Jenner may just reach this. They could run 4, and the ball might just win. It does. Where's that gone? It's out towards the boundary. 4 more. O'Keefe couldn't get near it. A magnificent shot.
I had 3 guys out there. And at one stage, I clearly remember him square driving or cutting between the 3 of those guys on a couple of occasions. Now, I mean, that's amazing batting.
He's on 99. And that's his 100. And a standing ovation.
It does stick in my mind as one of the great innings that I've had the, in this case, not so much the pleasure to see, but the job of trying to stop.
And in the air, bluffed the dust, could be 6. Beautiful shot. That's a 6.
Very few people could have played in innings like Sobers played, and so I felt that, having grown up as a teenager in Adelaide and seen him play here, I'd recognise the genius of the man at that stage. But to see it against that quality bowling just brought it home to me that he really was a class above the rest of us.
He's as far in front of the next all-rounder that I've seen as Bradman is in front of the next guy in batting average, and that's a hell of a lot.
202, 24 fours, 2 sixes, only 329 minutes.
Also, I would say about Gary Sobers, he's the best batsman that I ever saw or played against. Tremendous batsman.
Magnificent shot, and Sobers does not move from the crease.
Sir Donald Bradman would later describe this Sobers masterpiece
Magnificent shot
as the greatest innings he had ever seen played in Australia.
There's his 250. He could be out. Doug Walters caught it mid-on. And Gary Sobers leaves the ground, and the crowd is standing to applaud Gary Sobers as he leaves the ground. Caught Walters bowled Greg Chappell, 254. I'll say no more, just listen to that crowd.
One of the first to applaud Sobers and his great innings was Dennis Lillee.
And Dennis had a smile on his face. And he said to me, you know, I heard about you. I got my tail cut properly. I appreciate it, you know. And that was the whole thing about the innings, you know. And Dennis and I became very, very good friends after that.
You know, after all, he was my hero. I mean, you know, the great man. And I suppose I can always, even if it was against me, if it was a great innings, I can appreciate it. Don't necessarily always like it, but I can appreciate it. And so I was just basically saying to him that, you know, that was just amazing.
Well, we all sat watching Gary Sobers make 254, and you know, it was more interesting because of his frame of mind. I mean, he'd got problems on the home front. His wife and little boy had gone as a result of the problems they were having, and they lived in Melbourne.
And I said, Sobey, if that's the bloody thing that's annoying you so much, I said, give me a phone number, I'll ring her up and tell her to get bloody home straight away.
My lasting memory of the man was when he walked off the ground, his wife had agreed to come back and speak to him about their problems. And of course, it's common knowledge now they managed to put it together for a while anyhow. And the whole stadium, including Bradman, who subsequently went on to describe this as the greatest innings he's ever seen, or one of them, were on their feet and cheered this guy off, except one person. And that was his wife, who was sitting just in front of us. And, you know, he went straight downstairs, Gary Sobers, and he met his wife downstairs, and the two of them reconciled. And that was a very, very special time for all of us, because there was all this emotion involved in this whole thing. I mean, Sobey, in between, in the breaks during that innings, was not the normal Gary Sobers. He was a very, very quiet and very, very upset and disturbed character, in so much as he was heartsore. And yet he still played that knock. It was unbelievable.
The World 11 went on to win a very entertaining series, 2-1. The Australian crowds were given one last glimpse of another batting genius, South Africa's Graham Pollock, who scored a masterly 136 in Adelaide. World opposition to the policy of apartheid meant South Africa's cricketers were exiled from the arena of Test cricket for nearly a quarter of a century. The rebuilding of Australian cricket under Ian Chappell's leadership had commenced during the series against the rest of the world and was consummated during the 1972 tour of England. Chappell's young side was labelled as the worst side to ever leave Australia. The inexperienced Aussies got off to a bad start. They lost the first test to a more seasoned England team, again led by Ray Illingworth. Australia saved some face thanks to a fighting knock by wicketkeeper Rod Marsh.
A splendid 6, one of 4 to Marsh's credit, and part of a real face-saving innings for Australia, which was stopped by Greg just short of a century. Caught behind by Knott for 91. It was soon over.
The Aussies lost the match by 89 runs. Australia had now lost 7 of its last 11 Test matches. It had been nearly 2.5 years since Australia had registered a Test match victory.
We lost it in Manchester, and I thought, you know, what the hell's going on here? Because, you know, we didn't play all that well, and we got within, striking distance of them, and I thought we're not that far away from doing okay. And of course, Massey didn't play at Manchester, and had Massey played at Manchester, I mean, who knows? It might have been a totally different result.
The second test at Lord's, the spiritual home of cricket, became known as Massey's Massacre.
LBW for 30.
25-year-old Western Australian swing bowler Bob Massey had a dream Test debut, capturing 16 England wickets.
All out, with 8 of England's wickets falling to Massey for 84 runs in the first innings of his Test debut.
Bob Massey just bowled the best display of swing bowling I've ever seen in my life. He was just unplayable. He was unplayable.
Massey was well supported at the other end by Dennis Lillee.
Boycott the batsman. He's out, perhaps a little unluckily, for 6, with England 12 for 1. And Lilly, in his next over, defeated Luckhurst. 16 for 2, with another express train of a ball from Lilly.
Lilly bowled magnificently. He got the first 2 wickets in each innings and didn't get another. And I think basically it was because we couldn't get a touch on him. He kept going from the pavilion end, pitching about off and middle, going up the slope, missing everything, and nobody could get a touch on him. It was just too good.
18 for 3, with Marsh taking another catch behind, and Massey, who'd started bowling not quite as well as yesterday, quickly finding form. D'Oliveira caught Greg Chappell for 3.
It was just one of those extraordinary sights to see the ball curve as much as it did. I mean, the ball does swing on occasions in England, but and to swing and seam as much as it did from Massey, I mean, it's just as if he had it on a string that day, and I'm sure he probably did.
Massey again. Greg caught by Ian Chappell. Illingworth settled into something like a partnership with Smith, but Massey took him soon enough. Stackpole takes the catch. Caught by Greg Chappell, and England are all out for 116, leaving Australia just 81 to get, and Bob Massey with 16 scalps in his Test debut collection.
Bob Massey's performance is unbelievable. It's still unbelievable. I mean, looking back on it all these years later, I still can't believe that he did what he did. I mean, he bowled magnificently, he swung the ball magnificently, but Dennis Lilly bowled magnificently as well. And Bob got the wickets. I mean, that's the way it goes sometimes.
With the scores level, it was Stackpole who fittingly hit the winning run off Luckhurst. A convincing win by 8 wickets, credit for which can be taken by bowlers Lilly and particularly Bob Massey.
That was probably the most elated I'd ever felt in a winning cricket match, because probably more subconsciously than consciously I recognised that was the turning point for us on that tour. We'd convinced ourselves, we'd proven to ourselves that we could compete with these blokes under their own conditions. Unfortunately, there were a few more twists and turns to unfold before the series ended.
Those twists and turns unfolded on a diabolical pitch at Headingley that was infected with a mysterious fungus called fusarium.
Fusarium's a very strange thing to find in England and at Headingley because it flourishes best where the temperature's above 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And it came as a great surprise to me to know that it should have struck Headingley just at the time the Australians were about to play there, and at the time Derek Underwood had been pulled out of oblivion to go up there and bowl.
I don't think Underwood had played it until then. And I think that they, you know, when they brought Underwood in, it was named the team, I suddenly smelt a bit of a rat.
This one was just slightly, a little bit browner. And I thought, goodness, there wasn't the growth of grass on there, that this one could turn perhaps third day, or in fact, it turned a little bit from almost day one.
Look at that, Walters has gone, that one turn and lift in a fine catch by Parfitt.
Love seeing the back of that green cap go to the pavilion, of course I did. And especially if it was players of the ilk and class of Greg and Dougie. Gosh, some battles I had against Dougie. He was a wonderful player of spinners.
Yeah, to think that there was all that grass, and it was very verdant. It was the greenest grass I think I'd ever seen. And there was this strip 22 yards by about 10 feet that was absolutely bare of grass. And to have claimed that it was caused by a disease just boggled my imagination. I'm no gardener, but I reckon if something's going to attack a strip that 22 yards by 10 feet, it's probably going to go for the rest as well. But anyway, that was the claim.
The test was played on July 27, and July 5, we did a match between Yorkshire and Warwickshire, played on a wonderful green top. You couldn't pick out the pitch from the rest of the square. So it was decidedly unfortunate that when the test match came along, there was this bare strip in the midst of the dark green. Nobbling. What? I don't quite understand nobbling.
He's
he's asking, and he's given him out. A little tickle under the pad. Underwood on the hat-trick, 2 in 2, and Verity out for naught first ball.
You put him on something that was a bit damp, as that Fusarium pitch was in 1972, he's impossible to play.
We walked out there and we thought, oh, you know, we've been done it. You know, these blokes have set us up.
No inside over on the pad, but applause there from his 10th colleague, applause from Tony Gregg. Wonderful over by Derek Underwood.
On that wicket, it was a wicket that was a good one to bowl on. Yes, I've got to carry that one round with me.
I did feel that we'd been set up a bit with that pitch. They obviously decided that Lilly and Massey were having too much of an influence on this Test series, and they were going to do something about it.
Bowl him, and that is the Ashes retained for England. Australia all out.
I think Headingley and the Fusarium and the pitch and the general conditions there buoyed them up for the Test match at the Oval.
I remember saying to the team before the Oval Test match, I said, as far as I'm concerned, we're the better team of these two sides. But I said, when I'm asked that question back home, I can't give that answer unless we square this series at 2-all.
If we went home losing the series 3-1, it was a failure. But 2-2 could almost be seen as a victory, particularly as we felt we'd been dudded in the Leeds Test match.
With Doug Walters out of form and out of the side, for the first time in 95 years, Australia went into a Test match with no representative from New South Wales. However, in another first, the side included 6 players from Western Australia.
Marsh takes the catch.
We went into that Test match absolutely determined. I hadn't seen a team more determined up to that point to turn things around and prove a point that we were good enough.
The Chappell brothers came together. This is Ian getting Illingworth away for 4.
Ian and Greg Chappell created history in Australia's first innings when they became the first brothers to each score a century in the same innings of a Test match.
And he receives the same treatment. Greg Chappell on 98 faces snow. And 2 runs gives him his 2nd century of the series. Ian Chappell continued undeterred. Here he gets 4 off Illingworth to bring up his 100.
The fact that we both got hundreds in that innings obviously was a very significant moment, more so in hindsight than it was at the moment, other than from the game's point of view. The fact that, you know, as 2 batsmen, we'd done our job.
Australia began the last day's play of the 5th Test at the Oval, chasing 242 for victory to square the series. History was created when, for the first time, the ABC provided live satellite coverage of this final day's play. Audiences around Australia sat on the edge of their lounge room seats as the game hung in the balance.
And it was left to Sheehan and Marsh to rally the innings.
At 5 for 171, still requiring another 71 runs for victory, the new fighting spirit of Ian Chappell's young side was exemplified by the determination of Paul Sheehan and Rod Marsh.
Marsh cut loose, being particularly severe on Underwood. Finally, with the scores level, Marsh faces Tony Gregg. A quick single, victory for Australia, joy for Marsh and for his colleagues.
They typified the way we felt about the win as they came off, as they hit the winning run, they came off swinging the bats around and excited. I mean, you don't see Australian teams sort of show that emotion very much. But there was a lot of emotion around that Test match.
Although we didn't win the Ashes back, to know in our own mind that we could level that series and feel as though in some circles that we were sort of dudded out of the Test match before, it sort of made us feel like we won.
I think it was that Test match, even more so than the Lord's Test match, that defined the moment for Australian cricket at that stage.
To me, that was the game that certainly convinced me, and I'm pretty sure it convinced the nucleus of that side that went on to be the terrific side of the 70s. It convinced all the really good players in that side that we were good enough to match it with the rest of the world. Because at that stage, England were the best side around. That's the last time England were a cricketing power, 1972. They've been on the wane ever since.
It was the defining moment for that team, Ian's captaincy and that team, because it held us together as a group. Had we lost that test match, I think it could have meant a lot to a few blokes, and that a few of them may not have played again after that. And we went on from success to success.
There's one, could be his 100. Yes, he'll come back for a second. Ian Chappell 100.
How do you think Ian Chappell will go as captain?
I'm quite sure he'll do well. I think he's been picked at probably the best time of your career to be picked when you're in form, and Ian's a very shrewd cricketer, and I wish him well, and I'm sure he will do well.
A lever to Greg Chappell. Back past the bowler, 4 more. Magnificent batting.
4 runs. Straight over the bowler's head. Good shot.
Illingworth bowling to Marsh. Oh, what a good shot.
Tremendous responsibility was thrown onto Dennis Lillee playing in his first test match. He bowls to Edrich, and the left-hander is caught by Stackpole. Congratulations from Ian Chappell for Dennis Lillee.
Huge crowd here, something like 70,000 to watch the first day of this game. Magnificent scene here.
By the mid-70s, cricket was booming. Record crowds were pouring through the turnstiles like never before, and gate takings were at an all-time high. In Australia, crowds were flocking to see cricket's deadly duo, Lillee and Tomo.
Could you smell fear in a batsman?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you couldn't miss. You'd never make a mistake on that. Yeah, you could smell it a mile if you could see it a mile.
And that was a nasty one. Edrich didn't move there. It wasn't, I should think, it couldn't be termed a bouncer.
I'm trying to scare him, trying to probably hurt him more than anything else, but I don't want to cause any permanent damage or anything like that. It's just a matter of trying to hurt him at the moment, perhaps in the ribs or the leg or something like that, so that he at least knows you're around and that he's a bit wary about getting behind the next one.
Lillee bowling to Luckhurst. And caught by Ian Chappell at first slip.
Rule number 1 of Test cricket: if you've got them, being the fast bowlers, hand it out, because when you haven't got them, you're going to be on the receiving end.
Under the captaincy of Ian Chappell, the Australian side developed into a winning combination. Building on the confidence gained during the 1972 Tour of England, Australia defeated Pakistan 3-0 at home, before going on to retain the Frank Worrell Trophy by beating the West Indies 2-0 in the Caribbean. However, the increasing amount of Test cricket being played in Australia and overseas was starting to take its toll on some of the game's leading players.
I've been away from work in that time. I wasn't being paid from work. We weren't being paid a lot from cricket. It was very hard to justify the time away. And I mean, I really didn't want to admit it to myself, but I could really see that this wasn't going to last for very long, because I couldn't afford to do it. I couldn't justify it in any way, shape or form.
Guys like Kenny Cunningham and John Corsby and lots of other guys were taking leave without pay or taking their holidays so they could go and play for their states. And the $8 a day was hardly reimbursing them for the time they were given.
We couldn't afford to lose the senior players who weren't Test match players. And at that point, Ken Cunningham and John Corsby had decided that they just couldn't go on playing Sheffield Shield cricket and have a job, because they were getting pressure from work about all the time off. And we just couldn't afford to lose players of their calibre and their experience.
Ian had been talking to my boss at the AMP about trying to set up some sort of superannuation. How could it be done? And he took it to the SACA and proposed it to the SACA, and it was summarily dismissed.
So I go to a meeting with Bradman. in his Perry Street offices there, you see, and I explain what I would like to do. And the main reasons I'm saying is because I want Corsby and Cunningham to stay in the game. I explain it, and I get harangued. "No, no, son, we can't do that," and away he goes. And I walked out of that meeting thinking to myself, Ian, did you just walk in there and put your wallet on the table and say, "Sir Donald, will you fill my wallet up with money?"
With his eye on the future, Greg Chappell was lured away from South Australia with an offer to captain Queensland in the Sheffield Shield competition.
From the cricket point of view, the leadership was the carrot. The business side of it was also important because I had to find a way to be able to make enough money to justify continuing to play cricket.
I recall Greg leaving and how disappointing that was for us, and to think that we couldn't hold him.
I got a phone call from Phil Ridings, who said that Sir Donald Bradman wanted to have a talk to me. Sir Donald was president of the SACA at that stage and was still a selector. We had lunch at the Adelaide Club, and really there wasn't much discussion about it. I've been quoted as saying what Sir Donald told me, but I've been rapped over the knuckles for saying it, so I won't say it again. He basically said that they didn't want to set a precedent, that if I wanted to go, then...
The contract Greg Chappell eventually signed with Queensland made him the highest paid cricketer in Australia at that time. The experience gained captaining Queensland would put Greg in the perfect position to take over the mantle of Australian captain from older brother Ian at some stage in the future. On the other side of Australia, in Perth, fast bowler Dennis Lillee was also contemplating his future.
It feels pretty good. I've had no stabbing pains, which was what was wrong with it before. That was why I had to stop. The pain was so much that I just couldn't go through the bowling action. But I've had none of those stabbing pains since I've had the plaster cast on.
The knowledge that I may never play again, that was what was put to me by Dr. Gilmore, my doctor in Perth. And when I heard that news, I was devastated. And the way I felt, I thought, he's right, I probably will never bowl again.
During the 1973 tour of the West Indies, Lillee broke down with a career-threatening back injury. He spent 18 months out of first-class cricket, undergoing an intensive rehabilitation program. His much-anticipated comeback coincided with England's 1974-75 tour of Australia.
It's an unlikely preparation for the English tour, hunting down wild pigs with a zest akin to collecting test scalps.
Australia had another secret weapon ready to fire at the unsuspecting Englishman, a fast bowler by the name of Geoffrey Robert Thompson. Tomo, as he soon would become known to everyone, certainly had a novel way of building up the stamina to hurl his thunderbolts.
Oh, mate. Third time proves. What do you reckon about that, Clyde?
He's a beauty, mate. He's a real Well done, old fella.
None of the pommies can run as quick as this thing.
I'm 100% fit, no excuses, no nothing, ready to go. And it wouldn't have mattered who I was playing against as far as I'm concerned. I was just going to give them a workover, and it just happened to be the Poms, unfortunately for them.
The English team that toured Australia in 1974-75 was captained by Mike Dennis. It boasted a very experienced batting lineup. However, one name that was missing was that of the man who had amassed 650 runs at an average of 94 in the test matches of the 1970-71 Australian tour, Geoffrey Boycott.
I'll just tell you a bit about Boycott. We were in the West Indies, Trinidad test match. They were 1-0 up, 1 to go. Good side by comparison with ours, better side than ours. And I'd got into a bit of a groove, and I'm not telling you the story because I got some wickets in this test match, but I did, I got 13. But I was given runs to bowl at. Boycott made 190 in that test match. And I bowled off spinners, and we won the test match, and therefore squared the series. Dennis was captain. What we'd effectively done, I was vice captain, was buy Dennis more time as captain. Now, that's the view you'd have if you're looking at it negatively. As far as I was concerned, we just won a test and we'd levelled the series. It was just a great feeling. Got a tap on my shoulder as we were coming off the ground. There's Boycott. Such a complex character. He said, well bowled. And I said, football about it, and he said the only trouble is we've kept him his job. See, he wanted to play Test cricket, but he just could not. He just found it so hard to play under someone that he didn't think was good enough. And, you know, that's a tragedy in a lot of ways, but it's also very naive and it's childish, because in life you can't always choose who you want to share things with. I mean, you've got to take sometimes what you're dealt. And it was a great shame, and it affected us, there's no doubt. Having Snow and Boycott through all those Test matches would have made a huge difference.
Although the England squad included 5 fast bowlers, Bob Willis, Peter Lever, Jeff Arnold, Chris Old and Mike Hendrick, the man who almost single-handed had bowled England to victory in the 1970-71 series, John Snow, was not selected.
John Snow, during that summer, had played in a test trial against Jeff Boycott and myself. They wanted to see how we played fast bowling, and it was a flat wicket at Worcester, and it never got above knee height.
1G Boycott scored a fairly laborious 100 in the first innings for, let's call them, the probables versus the possibles. And Snowy was on the other side. And there were some batsmen who didn't get a proper opportunity to bat in the first innings. And then Boycott came out to bat again in the second innings.
The whole thing was a farce. And I mean, I could fail to see the point of it. And I sort of said again, especially as I said, bowling against Boyks and Eadie, what the hell's the point of, trying to get them out? We knew how, everybody knew how they could bat.
He registered his protest by bowling leg breaks.
In the end, John Snow decided to bowl underarm. He said, why am I playing here on a flat wicket bowling to these two? And that didn't go down well with the selectors. I'd been bowling for sort of 10 years already, so if they didn't know how I could bowl, then, never would.
What did you end up bowling that day, underarm or leg breaks?
No, probably a mixture of both. We said to Mike Dines, our captain, we said, Mike, and we sat round, there was Tony Gregg, there was Keith Fletcher, myself, Derek Underwood, Alan Knott, and we had dinner together one night, and we said, Mike, you've got to make sure that John Snow comes with us on this tour to Australia, because he did so well in 71.
I tried very hard to get Snowy on it, but it was made quite clear to me that as no other England captain had been able to control John Snow, they couldn't see why I was going to be able to control him, which was very disappointing, because I was leaving these shores without one of the top bowlers that I thought could do a great job, especially after 70-71 when he took all these wickets against Australia.
If you thought Australia started the much-anticipated bouncer war during the first test in Brisbane, think again. It was none other than Tony Gregg.
That's caught, is he? Let's see what happens here. He's out, yes, he is out.
But I would hazard a guess that when Tony Gregg came to the batting crease, that he might be the recipient of 1 or 2 shorter pitch deliveries from Dennis Lilly.
He's given me the message that there's a nice cold shower waiting for me in the pavilion. So as I went past him, I said, just remember one thing. Remember who started this.
And I'll never forget Dennis coming into the dressing room after he came off and saying to Ian, just remember who started this. And Ian said, what are you talking about? And he said, just remember who started this.
Brian Luckhurst and I walked out, and Dennis Lilly was right back at the end of his run. We thought, well, this is funny, he's been bowling out for short run suddenly. So Brian said, what do you think? And I said, well, I don't know, but you take first ball and we'll see how it goes. And of course, Dennis came in and bowled quick.
Having faced both of them, mind you, Lilly in club cricket and quite a lot of Thompson in Shield cricket, all I knew was that standing 30 yards behind the crease was a lot easier than standing at the crease facing the buggers.
And appeal this time, his walk, he's out. Brilliantly caught by Marsh. Luckhurst caught Marsh, bowled Thompson.
He was quick, and sometimes he hit the bat before the bat was ready to hit the ball hit the bat, and you thought, my gosh, what was that? Hit the splice and it's gone.
And in the air, what's that? Is he out? He's out. Amos caught Jenner, bowled Thompson.
I saw the look on the face of a couple of the batsmen, and I wasn't laughing. Because, I knew how they were feeling. It was intimidating stuff. It was dangerous stuff.
As he used to say, I just sort of shuffle up and go wham.
Thompson bowling to Dennis. That was a pretty vicious ball, that one.
Well, I do remember my first ball for him because he hit me on the shoulder as it reared up, and that was quite painful, although I couldn't show it.
And they'll play it on his bowl.
We needed to attack them, otherwise we were just going to be fodder. And that's that's what I adopted, and I decided also to try and stir them up a little bit.
And I think the storm signals are up. I think Lilly has intimated to Greg what his intentions are.
We spent the first innings, or England's first innings, trying to knock Tony Gregg's block off. And this happened mainly because every time he'd hit Dennis for 4, he'd signal a boundary.
Lilly bowling to Gregg. And that's 4. And look at Gregg now, signalling 4 for himself.
That was Greggy. That was great, the way Greggy played, and he always wanted to try and stir people up. He would try and stir Ian Chappell up each time. He would try and stir all the bowlers up.
And that could be his 100. It's wide of Walters. Walters coming around very quickly, and he can't get to it. There's his 100.
If you make 100 against guys on a pitch that suits them, you know, when it was quick, those are the occasions you remember fondly. And I'm pleased that, you know, there are others that remember it as well.
He just got in there and he tried to give it back to us. He got away with it, that first dig, the 100, you know what I mean, because we were just trying to kill him, and it was ridiculous. And that was the first time and the only time I ever seen Ian Chappell filthy. He got in that dressing room and he just had a go at Dennis and I, calling us idiot, just shortly in that, and we go, yeah, winner. He said, and you idiot, talking to me, he said, you're the one that should have got him out. You know, a Yorker straight into his big plates of meat and knock him, you know, head over heels, and then if it was any good, hit the stump. This is what he said.
However, England's difficulties with the raw pace of Lilly and Tomo were well and truly exposed during their second innings.
Thompson to Edridge.
And bowl him.
Thompson to Amos.
Chance, and he's out. Caught by Walters. Thompson bowling to Dennis.
Caught by Walters.
Enter Tony Gregg.
Thompson bowling to Gregg. Oh, bowled him. Yorked him, leg stump. And the jubilation from the Australian team.
He absolutely bowled me one of the best balls I've ever received. In that second innings, we knocked my leg stump back, which that was the start of the sand shoe crusher thing, because I didn't used to wear spikes when I batted.
Terrific to see that ball flying, and you know, and stumps cartwheeling, and the big sand shoe crusher coming in every now and again, and you know, he was just a mixed bag, Tom. They were going all over the place, but quick.
Thompson to Lever. And this is just out of the reach of Lilly.
Those days you only got a cap on, you know, compared to these days. They come out like Sir Lancelot, you know. So it's a bit of a different story.
The apprehension on some of the poor batsmen's faces and in their eyes was, you know, it was sort of, you could see that they weren't all that happy about being there. Some of them.
It could be a catch. It's just short of Jenner. Hit him on the hand and he's threw his gloves off. That must have hurt.
Chappell came up and said, Derek, how's the hand? Which one was it? And I said, oh, it was my right. And he said, oh, that's a shame, we were aiming for the left.
Bowled. It's all over. Australia win by 166 runs. England all out for 166. And Australia win outright by 166 runs.
I think if I was playing against Tomo, as often as some of those guys had to, and him going at full revs, I don't think I'd have been too happy as a batsman.
Battered and bruised, England had to find replacements for 2 injured batsmen, Dennis Amos and John Edridge, for the second test. The Australian press called the English team Dad's Army when they recalled one of their old generals back into battle. 42-year-old Michael Colin Cowdrey, MCC by name and nature, was summoned from the depths of a cold English winter to do battle with the firepower of Lillian Thompson on the fastest wicket in Australia, Perth.
England always do the same things. In moments of crisis, you go back to experience.
Colin was still viewed as one of the best, if not the best player of fast bowling in England.
I got him at home and I said to him, "You've been watching the series?" Yes, he'd been sitting in his armchair, ducking and weaving like most people. And I said, "Well, I've got something to ask you, Colin." I said, "You probably see we've got a few injuries and we need an experienced man, somebody who's, batted in the top order, got the runs. You're the first choice. Would you be interested in coming out to join us and do battle?" And the words that came down the phone to me were, "I would love to, Mike."
He walked in the dressing room, Kipper, such a lovely man, and he pushed the buckles on his case, and it started to hiss. And it was all this rubber foam that he had in the top, right? Which was a special stuff that he used to actually stick onto his chest. It's only about that thick, but he used to just cut it into a little piece and stick it onto his chest. And that was his chest protector.
When Cowdrey got out there, Tomo was bowling from the causeway end, and he's let one go that's bounced over the wicketkeeper and slips and hit the sight screen on the first bounce, and Cowdrey's at the non-striker's end. This is his first viewing of Tomo. And as Tomo comes back, he gives Cowdrey the eye line, just looks straight at him, doesn't say anything. And Cowdrey, which I think is one of the best one-liners ever, said, "Good morning, my name's Cowdrey."
I'm thinking to myself, I shook hands with him and that, but it was something different. Nobody's ever done it before or since, and I just thought, of good luck if you think that's going to do you any good.
Credit where credit's due. I mean, he showed tremendous courage, didn't flinch at all, and would have got hit 20 or 30 times during the series. Serious blows to the body, and really didn't show any pain at all.
You could see he was a good player, and he ended up, we were great mates and all that sort of thing, Colin Cowdrey, which is quite ironic, isn't it? I mean, his upbringing to mine, but he's a really top bloke, he was, and a top player.
Another batsman who faced a baptism of fire was a left-handed opener from Lancashire, David Lloyd, who was playing in his debut Test match against Australia.
A very partisan crowd, which is what you're there for anyway. You don't want it easy. If you're a visitor and you're playing international sport, you know you're going to cop some, and you're going to be, as an opening batsman, your #1 target, if you like.
David Lloyd, who's in as an opening batsman, he said at a team meeting that Thompson wasn't a worry to him. He said that he could play Thompson with what is laughingly known as his appendage. And he set out and proved it.
Thompson to Lloyd. And hit badly there that time. It was a nasty one.
And I'm very square on. And you just have that moment, glimpse. Gosh, I hope this hits the bats. Well, it missed, and everybody knows where it hit me.
I used to love left-handers because of the way I bowled. They used to go away and then you straighten one up and jag back at him. Well, that's what happened. I just cleaned him up right in the midriff, but he's gone down and right.
It's 1974, and all cricketers would remember what I was wearing for protection. There was only one thing that you wore, and it was a pink thing, and it's got a pink lightsome, and it had holes in it, this pink lightsome, completely useless for the job that it was supposed to do. And you can use them now in bathrooms as an accessory. You can put your soap in there now. That's about as much use as they are. I'll put this as politely as I can, that everything that should have been inside that pink lightsome had found its way through these holes and was trapped now on the outside. No wonder I somersaulted into the floor. Just landed straight on my head.
There was bits and pieces hanging out everywhere. It was a very, very delicate operation, like a jigsaw puzzle, to get the bits out without doing more damage.
I swear to you that particular day, we didn't need a doctor, we needed a welder to get this box and all its contents pulled apart. So I lose my voice every February, and I put that down to Jeff Thompson. Yeah.
When it was Australia's turn to bat, the irrepressible Doug Walters played a priceless cameo of an innings between tee and stumps on the second day.
Through mid-wicket, that's 4. Through mid-wicket, beats the net, pointless at mid-wicket, straight through for 4. Through mid-wicket, another 4 to Walters, going to the boundary like a rocket. Short ball from Titmus, hammered through square leg. Arnold is after it. It's going to be close whether he can stop it. He can't. It's another 4 to Walters. That's his 50.
As Walters piled on the runs, the question was being asked, could he achieve the rare distinction of scoring a century in a session?
I was on 93 come the last over of that match that day, and Willis still wasn't on strike, mind you. Roscoe had done his trick again the over before. So we had a leg by off the first ball of the last over, and I got down the other end.
And Walters over the head of the keeper, down to the fence for 4, is it? 4 runs to Walters. He's 97. Well, 5 balls to go. Walters on 97. And that's what you call a grandstand finish.
And I knew that Willis, seeing he'd been averaging 3 or 4 short pitch balls and over, I was going to get another couple before the end of the day's play, because he had 2 guys on the boundary behind square leg.
And they're the 2 principals in the drama. In the foreground, Willis. In the background, you see Walters. The 3rd last ball. And no run. Lloyd fielding in the covers. Here's the 2nd last ball. And 1 ball to go to end the day, and no, they're not. They were thought of taking a single.
Because of the way Doug Walters is, it's only natural that he'll do something historic. I'm saying, see, you've got to trust Dougie. Dougie will do this.
The gambling instinct came out that it was a 50-50 challenge, and if I bowled him a bounce for the last ball when I think he was on 97, it was either he that was going to be the winner or me, because the odds were that if he mishit it, it would certainly would go up in the air.
Doug Walters, 97. Here's the last ball of the day's play. He hit it, could be 4. Magnificent shot. It's out to the boundary. A 6, was it? A 6. A 6. Walters, 103. What a fantastic finish. One of the greatest finishes we've ever seen to a day's play in Australian Test cricket. Doug Walters, 100 in the session. He hit the last ball of the day's play for 6.
I ran off the ground knowing it was the last ball of the over, thinking that the boys would have the tops off a couple of bottles, but I ran into an empty dressing room.
We all agreed to the idea of getting in the showers and keeping very quiet and see what Doug would do.
So I flicked the tops off the 2 bottles, and the other boys have got pretty good hearing because they all come running out of the shower block at that time as well.
He actually won, because in the end everyone came out, you know, oh, good on you, Doug. But he won. Doug just, he's the imperturbable, the unflappable.
The on-field success of the Australian team and the public fascination with Lillee and Tomo saw sellout crowds flocking day after day to the tests. In the 70s, carrying in eskies full of beer was permitted. However, there were some restrictions. Patrons were limited to 24 cans per person. How times have changed. The advent of colour TV in Australia, live telecasts of each day's play around the country on ABC radio and television, saw an enormous surge in the popularity of cricket, especially amongst the younger generation. For the first time, it seemed that it was socially hip to be a cricket junkie. On the field, the players started to sense a shift in social attitudes. The rise in the number of patrons through the gate made many of them start to question the meagre remuneration they were receiving for their efforts.
Australia have regained the Ashes.
And they announced that the gate takings were $250,000. And once again, this is an indication of how dumb we were as cricketers. here's this announcement, $250,000 from the gate takings of this test match. And I suddenly stop and I think, right, we're on $200 each. That's 12 guys at 200. That's $2,400 out of $250,000. We're not making a very high percentage out of the gate takings.
Administrators were all thinking, as they had done for 70 years, what Alan Barnes eventually said. Now, Juster was a great guy and good friend of ours, but when he came out and said there are 50,000 people out there more who'd played Test cricket for Australia for nothing, that actually came at the wrong time, because it came at a time when the board, if not asking the players to play for nothing, weren't giving them much more.
I went out to the nets and I'm fuming. I'm batting in the nets and every ball that comes down is Alan Barnes' head and I'm whacking them, you see. And I walk back in the dressing room and I walk through the door and there is Ian Redpath, one of the milder blokes you would think in the Australian team. He has got Alan Barnes up against the wall, by the bloody throat, up against the wall, saying to him, "You bloody idiot. Of course there are 500,000 out there who would play for nothing, but how bloody good would the Australian team be?"
Well, Ian Chappell, as captain, had 2 meetings with the board in the period of the 1970s, and both of them extraordinarily unproductive.
And Bradman was sitting over there on my right. And from points 1 to 4, Bradman was sitting like so in his chair. And I'd make the point, and then it would be discussed by the board members if there was any discussion about it. And then when they were finished, Caldwell, who was running the meeting, would say, "Right, over to you, Ian," and I'd make the next point. And I remember when I got to point 5, Bradman sat up like that. So I'd point 5, whatever it was, about finance, and this voice comes from over on the right, "Oh no, son, we can't do that." And away he goes on the reasons why we can't do that, you see. He finishes. Any more conversation? No. None of the other board members say anything. Back to me again, you see. For point number 6, whatever point number 6 is, I get exactly the same response from Bradman again. "Oh no, son, we can't do that." Away he goes on all the reasons why we can't do that, see. Caldwell says, anybody else got anything they want to say? Nobody says anything again after Bradman's spoken, you see. So I move on to point number 7. As soon as I said, well, the next point, number 7, Bradman went like that, again in the chair.
Subsequent proposals that were put forward by Ian to the ACB and then myself as captain a couple of years later to the ACB, which again was a log of claims which included money, included the payment, but it was also included superannuation, looking after the players who played for a reasonable period, that they were the ones that had to be looked after. It wasn't so much the guys that played a few games here and there, but if a bloke played for 5 or 10 years, then he probably should get some sort of recognition from the ACB. And we talked, I know I can't talk for Ian, but I know with the presentation I made to the ACB up in Brisbane, at the ACB board meeting up there, the issues that were talked about was about having more of a say in our programming in Australia, overseas, what tours, how long the tours were.
There's money everywhere in the game. Never seen so much, never seen so many people coming through turnstiles and so on. So the players were starting to think, well, this is not right. And you had the thing where the 70s became a questioning era in life as in cricket itself. Why is this happening to us? Why are we not being paid a reasonable figure to play cricket for our country?
We weren't asking for a lot. In hindsight, we were asking for a pittance. But if they'd given us that, we'd have gone away as happy as Larry. That was the silly part of it. We'd have all we wanted to do was play cricket and not have to worry about money. We didn't want to have to worry about any of those issues. We just wanted to play cricket. And unfortunately, the Stonewall was really solid. Again, there was one particular individual who controlled things, and he just slammed the door very firmly in my face, and that was the end of the discussion.
Bradman, to me, had as much to do with World Series, the starting of World Series cricket as anybody, because I got the feeling that Bradman treated the board money as though it was almost his own money. He wasn't going to shell out anything.
In 1975, the inaugural World Cup of One-Day Cricket was staged in England between all the cricket-playing countries of the world, excluding South Africa. Record crowds flocked to the various matches played at all the major county grounds in England. The final between Australia and the West Indies was played in front of a capacity crowd at Lord's.
Normally you walked into Lord's and it was very, very staid and very quiet, and you didn't want to make any noise, you didn't want to, look as though you were going to enjoy yourself too much that day because you might upset somebody. You'd sort of almost skulk into the dressing room. But I can remember walking into that ground that day and being, bouncing in and almost being on a cloud just with the excitement that I experienced as we walked in from the street. There were plenty of people outside the gate still at that stage, and again many of them were West Indians, and there was music and there was noise, there were whistles, there was tambourines and drums, and it was fantastic.
In those days the real punters got to the game, the avid fans. We didn't have all this corporate hospitality, and we had a lot of support, and it was just a wonderful day out. It was brilliant sunshine, packed to the rafters, and it was just magnificent. I will never, never, ever forget that.
Magnificent hook shot out of the ground. Superb shot there by Lloyd. The West Indian crowd on their feet. And that's hoisted away into the grandstand balcony. Tremendous blow by Clive Lloyd. He got it in no uncertain terms. Beautiful flashing cover drive, typical of the man. The bat raised, the crowd on their feet, and what a delightful exhibition this has been by Clive Lloyd. You couldn't really wish to see a better 100 than that in any form of cricket.
Bernard Julian now to Ian Chappell.
Clive Lloyd's magnificent century in 100 minutes off just 82 balls meant Australia had to score 292 off 60 overs to win the World Cup. Ian Chappell was in full flight until a young Vivian Richards entered the picture and changed the course of the game.
So the two captains here in direct opposition. Very close just run him out. So Clyde Lloyd, come on, throw there from Viv Richards, a delighted Viv Richards.
Andy Roberts. Oh, and there must be a run out here. He must be out. Richards again, tragedy for Australia. A misfield there, the old rule of never run on a misfield.
Two men back now. Here are the fields. I think that Ian Chappell will be having something of a dart at him. Well, there's plenty of open spaces. And again they're in trouble, and again he's run out. Oh dear, what a calamity for Australia. And it's this man Richards again.
I think my throwing arm was in good nick. I'll never ever forget that period, because having to run two of my heroes out and individuals who we've admired, the Chappells, wow, it was like scoring 100 that day.
You would have thought we would have learnt that you shouldn't hit it to this fellow Richards and run. We certainly did in years to come.
Despite all the run-outs, some spirited batting by last wicket pair Dennis Lillee and Jeff Thompson in the fading twilight kept Australia's hopes alive.
It was getting close to 8:30 at night. And even with the daylight saving and the twilight over there, it was starting to get a bit hairy, because they got the Lord's building for a cricket ground, not a good colour, red brick. I mean, that's good colour, isn't it, right behind the bowler's arm. And the sight screens, they never made them big enough for them bloody West Indians,
And it's holder to Thompson. And that's it. He's told him to go back. The overthrow off a no ball again.
The crowd ran on the ground, and we're running, Tomo and I, and the ball is out there somewhere. And I said to Tomo, just keep running,
It seemed like we were running for half an hour. He stopped, and there's Dickie Bird at the other end, and he's shaking like a leaf, He thought he was going to get killed, And I said to Dickie, how many did you give us? He said, what, Tommy? He's shaking. I said, runs. He said, one. I said, mate, I've been running up and down here for half an hour. You've got to be kidding.
Thompson, who's played so well for his 21. And he's out. It's a great stop, but what a way to end the match. And I've never seen cricketers move as quickly, gathering the sacred stumps. The charge of the brigade over. A win for West Indies here by 17 runs.
Winning was important to us. Winning was important to us for a financial reason, too, other than, you know, just for the joy of it. It brought the West Indians together. You know, we were all a much happier people when we were doing well at cricket.
With the trophy in his hand, beckoning to Clive Lloyd to come up and receive it.
Taking in that moment, it was a tremendous feeling, and I knew it would do a lot for our cricket, and it did. I can remember, because I bowled 12 overs too, got 100, and I went out for dinner and I couldn't sit down. I stood up and ate because I was so tired. I was really, really, you know, as the English would say, knackered.
I don't think too many of us were convinced that the World Cup had this great future until that final. Once that final was over, I think we all knew that one-day cricket, and the World Cup in particular, had a special place in the game.
It was the signal of what was to come. I mean, it was really the first day for the rest of our life, and then the new era of cricket, I feel, when I look back on it.
After the World Cup, Australia stayed on to play a 4-test Ashes series against England. Crowd participation took on a new meaning during the Lord's Test match, when the unthinkable happened. Veteran broadcaster John Arlott described the scene.
A freaker! We've got a freaker down the wicket now, not very shapely, and it's masculine. And I would think it's seen the last of its cricket for the day. The police are mustered, so are the cameramen, and he's had his load. He's being embraced by a blonde policeman.
Within a couple of years, the novelty of streakers on the ground had become very irritating for the players.
And Greg Chappell, he has stated in the past his intention of dealing with streakers. He's not happy with them. He'll have to take that fence and one.
Flying high after their success in the World Cup, the West Indies flew to Australia for the eagerly awaited 1975-76 Test Series. Under the captaincy of Clive Lloyd, the team included a number of exciting young players that would later become legends of the game. Andy Roberts, Michael Holding, Gordon Greenwich and Vivian Richards. Young, talented but inexperienced, the West Indies faced a tough, aggressive, seasoned Australian team in a shootout to decide the World Championship of Test cricket.
We want to win, there's no doubt about that. It has been billed as a sort of World Championship. So I'm hoping that we can give our best, and if we do give our best, I think the Australians could be up for some very good cricket.
Music. Shot one, take four.
The popularity of the West Indies saw them taking the first tentative steps into the world of advertising when they recorded a commercial promoting a particular brand of men's toiletries.
Batsman wear proof 33, he get 100 runs by tea.
So it was the pretty shirt, the flowery shirt and all that stuff with the afro. It was like Sly and the Family Stone sort of stuff. It was that period where you felt just a cool dude because there was the soul music and all that sort of stuff. And then you had, I think, people who were just coming out of that period of the flower power times. Yeah, it was a serious combination, and the cricket, I think, matched.
Batsman wear proof 33, he get 100 runs by tea.
You boy bowler swing and lead, no his hair is looking great. Batsman used to 33.
Batsman LBW.
Once the Test matches got underway, the West Indies batsmen soon found out, just as the song said, the Aussie pacemen were not much fun.
I can remember one occasion where we had Lawrence Rowe, who I've always felt was one of the coolest individuals that you could find whilst batting at the crease. And he used to whistle little things like the games that people play and things like that. And I'm at the other end and I'm looking at my hero, and I could see Tom was rushing in and Tom was letting everything fly. So I walked up to the wicket and I said, which was commonly known then, Yaga, why are you not whistling like the games that people play anymore? He said, no, you cannot do that when you're facing this guy, Jeff Thompson, because you can hardly see where the ball is coming from, sometimes between his legs. And he said, whenever it rips, there's enough time, he says, for you to whistle anything.
And caught brilliantly. Marsh. Rod Marsh taking a wonderful catch.
Jeff Thompson, to me, was the biggest difference in that series. He was a physical threat to the team, to the batsman. He bowled at fearsome pace and was really extremely hostile. Of course, he had Dennis Lilly at the other end, an outstanding fast bowler, where Thompson was absolutely sheer pace, bunks, hostility.
This guy was dangerous. I thought that, and he was much stronger than we expected. I'd say probably he didn't realize his strength and his stamina. He would remove batters when you think they were settled. He'd get, and he made that break. He made the breakthrough, and then Dennis Lilly would come and do the rest, clean it up.
It's always a picture in my mind, that 75, 76 series. I can still see those wickets, and I can still see Thomas spreading eagle and just letting fly. Yes, I think that was a great baptism. This is what I think, and I'll put that particular period down to how I myself approached cricket in the future. I felt, wow, if you could go through this and come through this, which was like a war, well, any little battle you could achieve, and I felt reasonably comfortable after that. And I think this is what I needed as an individual at that time.
The 1975-76 series was a triumph for Greg Chappell. Taking over the leadership from brother Ian, Greg scored a century in each innings of his first test as Australian captain in Brisbane. He went on to amass 702 runs in the series at an average of 117 and led Australia to a crushing 5-1 victory in the series. Australia was now the undisputed world champion of Test cricket.
The reason we won was we had the best pace attack, and Dennis and Tomo were the leaders of the pace attack. We had Max Walker and Gary Gilmore in that series.
Australia's success with the four-pronged pace attack would make a lasting impression on Clive Lloyd and his West Indian team.
The standard then was set by the Australians. If you have 4 fast bowlers and they're the best bowlers you have, play them. And the West Indies were fortunate then in that period right after 75-76, where Andy Roberts and Michael Holding first really established themselves. And right after that, a rash of fast bowlers, young fast bowlers, came through, so that not only were 4 being played simultaneously, but you had probably 4 others waiting in the wings.
With a batting lineup loaded with talent and a fearsome pace attack, the West Indies would come to dominate world cricket for the next 20 years. With enormous crowds attending cricket matches, gate takings were at an all-time high. However, the top players in the game worldwide were still not receiving payments commensurate with their high spectator appeal. It is mystifying why cricket administrators at the time seemed reluctant to explore the possibilities of advertising, sponsorship and the sale of television rights as a means to improve the pay and conditions for the cricketers that were providing such an exciting, entertaining and very marketable product.
We always compared ourselves, I suppose, to other professional sports, the tennis and golf, soccer in this country, and we wondered whether we were getting paid the right amounts, wanted more money, and that sort of thing. I used to say, blankly at the pre-test match dinners, and what the hell, I'm here, I'm getting paid 160 quid for heaven's sakes. Look, I could go and empty dustbins down rather than being here inside at Lord's on St John's Wood Road. If I'd been outside and emptying the dustbins, I could have been doing that and earning more money in the course of the week and being finished at midday than I've been here, being supposedly at the top of my profession and entertaining, X number of people, hopefully, with a game of cricket.
You're getting paid peanuts, let's be fair. And, if you're going to give your life to playing 10 years of Test cricket, at the end of that time, if you've been a top player, then you should be able to get out of the game without any real financial worries. And that wasn't happening. I mean, people were finishing playing Test cricket and not having a job or anything to go to and struggling. And that shouldn't be happening. And we felt that there's certainly a lot of money was coming into the game and not going towards the players. And there were some big crowds there at that time.
£1,200 for 5 test matches. That's what we earned. The grounds were all packed to capacity, and then we played, I think, 3 one-day games. We went on a tour and we got £3,000 for that. Now, in any language, that's pretty ordinary. However, we'd have all done it for nothing anyhow. And that was the great weakness. They knew that we'd play, and they, in England, especially thought we'd never do anything to unsettle it.
Ian Chappell received approaches on 3 separate occasions during the 1970s from businessmen and entrepreneurs who were keen to organise professional exhibition tournaments.
On all 3 occasions, this is how dumb I am, I said to them, what you've got to do is you've got to go to the boards and get their agreement, because you won't do any good without the cricket grounds. And each time they went to the boards told them to buzz off. Didn't want to know them.
We're talking about exhibition games outside of the season. They weren't to be games that were going to be played in competition to the ACB program. They were to be games, you know, outside of that, outside of our normal season. So we were pretty keen because more cricket, and they were talking about, you know, paying reasonable money. But again, we sent them off to the ACB. Never heard another thing.
If they'd allowed us to have played in these extra things and be well paid there, then we wouldn't have been complaining about the fact that we weren't getting so much money from Test cricket. To me, it would have been the ideal, you know, would have complemented perfectly.
The rise of aggressive on-field behaviour during the 1970s created a perception that the Chappell era was responsible for a devaluation of standards in the game of cricket. The Australians, under Ian Chappell, were accused of perfecting verbal gamesmanship into an art form that became known as sledging.
As for the sledging and the devaluation of values, I absolutely refute it. I mean, sledging started, I mean, the word sledging's been taken all out of context.
The name was invented after one day of a cricket match where a few of the boys were having a drink, South Australia against New South Wales, and they'd gone to someone's place and having a bite to eat, and someone, one of the cricketers, made a remark, and one of the other cricketers looked at him and said, "Oh, nice sledge, mate," and that was Percy Sledge and When a Man Loves a Woman.
Sledging started on the baseball field. I mean, I grew up playing cricket and baseball, and I mean, apart from the blokes that played, no one else turned up for a game of baseball. So if you didn't make your own you know, noise, no one would make a bit of noise. So the 2 benches would be making all the noise. You know, the 2 teams sitting on the bench when you weren't fielding, you were making a lot of noise, and a lot of it was quite derogatory comment to the opposition about themselves and their parentage and all of that sort of stuff. And because cricket and baseball overlapped, and a lot of the blokes that played baseball played cricket, some of that spilled over onto the cricket field.
I think Ian was probably the target of a lot of people in regard to sledging, and I think it's a bit of an injustice. You've got to bear in mind also that Ian played baseball, and baseball was a different game. You know, being a catcher as he was, you're always in the game. It's a game where you've got to be talking.
My response to people who tell me that all of this started in the 70s is absolute unadulterated codswallop. If you read anything about the history of the game, you will know that gamesmanship was well and truly alive back in the days of Dr. W.G. Grace. His brother E.M. Grace apparently was one of the great gamesmanship men, and he would do it from point.
While I was playing, that whole business of what they had to say never affected me one little bit. And I think it's fair to say too that the majority of people in our dressing room felt the same way.
And I've always looked upon a weakness in character in an opponent as being exactly the same as a weakness outside off stump or a weakness against the short pitch delivery. It is there to be exploited.
If a player had if he was affected by something someone said, and if you got him out as a result of a bit of verbal, so be it. That's the way I felt at the time. That's the way I was brought up.
We were a very aggressive side. We were arrogant at times. I think we had a lot of success. We demanded success, and we expected it.
Lita Willis, and one hurt too.
They were tough. There were a few verbals from behind you when you were batting, but I think it was more engendered by Dennis Lilly's aggression and whole demeanour as a fast bowler than sort of orchestrated sledging of the opposition or abuse of the opposition. These were tough characters, most of whom were very good players and very confident in their ability.
We were labelled sledgers, ugly Australians, the whole lot. And we were very aggressive in our play, there's no doubt about that. I mean, we played to win, as you should, but we took it up to the opposition. We asked for no mercy and gave none, and we were full on, no doubt about that.
While it stayed in the middle, and while it wasn't the sort of thing that was being picked up by microphones and taken into lounge rooms, and while the cameras weren't in your face so much so that they could read your lips, as far as I'm concerned, anything was acceptable.
Ian Chappell not terribly happy about that one, and I'm quite sure that Tony Greig had a few words to him as he walked past him. Ian Chappell not happy about it.
We were no angels, but some of the opposition weren't angels either. So, you know, it was just one of those things. It was an era we went through. We were probably angry and frustrated, probably more at, I suppose it was an underlying thing of basically, you know, not being looked after for playing for our country, I suppose.
There were members of teams from the subcontinent who were offended by our aggression because their culture is very different. You look at someone angrily and you've offended someone in their culture, and we did that regularly. You know, we glared at them and stared at them and we tried to intimidate them. And on occasions, I'm sure we did intimidate them, and that was part of what Test cricket's all about.
Ian Chappell at first slip, Greg Chappell at second, Walters at third, Redpath at fourth, and Mallet in the gully.
At first slip, when Dennis Lilly and Jeff Thompson are bowling, I've got to be 30 yards. I'll talk in the old language that was at the time. I've got to be 30 yards from the batsman. For him to hear what I'm saying, I've got to be doing a lot of yelling. Now, if I'm yelling from first slip to the batsman, surely the square leg umpire is going to hear it.
He didn't verbal people on the cricket field, and yet he's labelled as being the king of sledge. I mean, those that played with him are the people who can and probably should defend him. But I mean, again, you know, Ian doesn't want people going around defending him, and I don't particularly want to go around defending him either, except I think it needs to be said.
It wasn't started by Ian, there's no doubt about that, or the Australians at that time. We were probably pretty good at it though, and that was probably what hurt more than anything else or gave us a bad name.
In March 1977, a unique event was staged in Melbourne. The first Test match between Australia and England was played at the Melbourne Cricket Ground in March 1877. To celebrate 100 years of Test cricket, a special centenary Test was played to mark the occasion. Over 240 former Test players from both countries attended the largest reunion in cricket history.
Here's Jack Ryder leading out the Australian contingent.
87-year-old Jack Ryder, the oldest Australian player, had the honour of leading the former Australian Test captains onto the hallowed MCG arena for the opening ceremony.
To walk onto the MCG with guys like Bradman and Ryder and all those wonderful Test cricketers, and a wonderful reception we got, it was very, very moving. In fact, I think I probably had tears in my eyes when I walked out on the ground, particularly as I was walking on ahead of Ian Chappell walking down the race there, and a woman says, "We love you, Bill," and she turned around and said, "You're a mongrel, Chappell." I thought that typically summed up the Melbourne crowd, but when he got on the ground, of course, he got a magnificent ovation well, but it was very, very moving, and it was wonderful.
This was huge, and we were all staying right alongside the ground, all the old guys and the players, and so, I mean, you know, it was absolutely outstanding, and then of course we then had to play a match, which almost seemed, you know, how could we live up to this party? You know, it was, and we did. I think we did. I think it was a great Test match.
Right, you can have it. Thank you very much. Good game.
The match got off to a bad start when Australian opener Rick McCosker mistimed a hook shot off Bob Willis and had his jaw broken. His misfortune was further compounded when the ball fell onto his stumps.
Well, that was a most unlucky dismissal.
Australia was dismissed for just 138 in its first innings. But more sensations were to follow.
He's out.
England was routed for just 95. The great Dennis Lillee taking 6 for 26 off just 13 overs.
And a chance, he's out. It's all over. Marsh again, a brilliant catch. Marsh has taken 4 catches. England all out 95. Lillee 6 for 26. One of the greatest performances of his career. And Rod Marsh has broken Wallagrout's keeping record with his 188th dismissal.
The game looked like being over within about 2.5 days. As Doug Walters said, we'll be fishing by 2:30 day 3, which was his statement when he thought a game wasn't going to go long.
With Her Majesty the Queen scheduled to be introduced to the players during the tea interval on the final day, there were grave concerns that the match would not go the distance. Enter 21-year-old Test debutant David Hookes.
And down the ground it goes. That's a great shot. That's almost a 6. Over the fence, or hitting the fence on the first bounce.
We did have a huge function at the MCG before the game, and I was walking somewhere and Tony Greig was in a group and he said, not another Australian left-hander that can't bat. And I looked around for Marsh and Gilmore, but they weren't there, so I assumed it was me. And I didn't say anything. I thought, well, who's this bloke? You know, and I knew who he was, of course.
He's got that round towards fine leg, a chase round for Underwood, and it's going to be close. Underwood will get to it. No, he won't.
I mean, I had a couple of little run-ins with him. First of all, when he arrived at the crease as a youngster, I went straight to silly point and indulged in a bit of conversation with him, which he handled, I've got to tell you, absolutely superbly. He'd obviously been well trained. In South Australia, I might add.
And away it goes again. Beautiful shot. 3 in a row. And the young man on his first test is 48. 5 for 235. And away it goes for could be his 50, out towards the boundary, a beautiful shot. 4 in a row. 4 4s off England's captain, 52 to David Hookes, a brilliant performance. And through again. It's racing out towards the boundary, it might get there, let's see what happens, it's very close indeed, and the ball will win 5 in a row.
Do I have to say much about it? I get reminded about it on a regular basis, and I suppose you look back on these things and you think, well, I'm part of that little bit of history.
Although David Hookes was dismissed soon after, his priceless cameo of an innings changed the course of the centenary test.
And the crowd giving him a magnificent ovation now as this young fellow departs the scene.
Some spirited batting by Rod Marsh swung the game in Australia's favour. He was on the verge of becoming the first Australian wicketkeeper to score a century in a test against England, when it looked like he was going to run out of partners.
And that's the other side of the ground. Away it goes to the mid-wicket area. There's a fieldsman there, but he won't reach it. Into the fence for 4. And here's McCosker swathed in bandages, with March approaching his century.
McCosker said, I'm going out, and Greg Chappell said, no, you're not. The doctor came in and Greg said to the doctor, what's going to happen? He said, nothing. If he gets hit, he gets hit. No more damage can be done. And then we left it up to McCosker. And of course, he walked out. The word that is never used except for then is swathed in bandages, a new word that I learnt the next day. And the crowd started singing Waltzing McCosker. It was just amazing.
I didn't believe it that he'd come out. And I thought, Jesus, Greg, you're a hard man sending him out. But I think Rick just wanted to come out himself. That was a special moment. I felt whether or not he came out to help me get 100, I don't know what it was, or whether or not he came out to help the team get more runs, or whether or not he came out to, prove to himself that he could come out. I'm damned if I know, but whatever it was a fine effort from a fine man, actually.
So Marsh is 99. And that could be it. This is off the pad. They've gone through to 1. Let's see what happens. The umpire is indicating that's his 100. Rod Marsh has made history in cricket. The first Australian keeper, the only player so far in the centenary test, and that's 2 records he's broken in this very match. A wicket-keeping record for Australia, and now a batting record for Australia. The first man in history, an Australian keeper, to get a century in a test, and he's done it in the centenary.
England was set the seemingly impossible task of scoring 463 in 11 hours to win the match. However, some audacious batting from an unlikely hero, a quirky individual from Nottingham named Derek Randall, made an England victory a real possibility.
Derek Randall, 100 in his first test against Australia.
he would jump around the crease. You know, he's moving around the crease. I used to ask him to stand still because it was very hard to hit a moving target.
And that's hit him on the head, a bad one. Innocent field there. The ball's gone to second slip and caught. Now the batsman is down.
Dennis looked down and he said, are you okay, Derek? And then he looked and he said, oh, Mr. Lilly, well bowled. That was a very good ball, wasn't it? Give me the ball. I'll hit him on the head again.
Lilly to Randall.
Yeah, interesting character, Derek Randall. Son of a miner out of Nottingham. Fish and chips and beer, you know, pretty stable sort of character, nothing special about his requirements in life. I remember well in India, the first time that he went to a party, where we laid it on a little bit. He went to a party at the Godrej home, big industrialists there, and I bumped into him at midnight, and he had a bottle of the finest French champagne in one hand, and he had a piece of toast, and an Indian bearer was scraping Russian caviar onto his toast. And I said, you okay, mate, everything okay? And he said, Captain, champagne's fantastic. Strawberry jam tastes of fish. That's Derek Randall.
Derek Randall was eventually dismissed for a remarkable 174, an innings that won him the Man of the Match award and generous applause from the very appreciative Australian crowd.
One of the finest innings we've seen in years and years on this Melbourne ground, and the player, Derek Randall. Everybody here is standing up to give him a tremendous ovation as he comes back to the pavilion after an absolutely fantastic night.
It was yet another superhuman effort from the great Dennis Lilly that saw Australia home.
And that's it, it's LBW, Alan Knott is out, Lilly has struck again to finish off this test match. England all out for 417, another great performance there by Lilly to see the end of England. And Australia triumphing by a margin of 45 runs.
It was a great test match, and you know, Max O'Connell got his calculator out at the end and realised that if he gives the LB out, it'll be the same score as it was 100 years ago, so he just gave Alan Knott out, and that was it.
The centenary test celebrated the virtues and traditions of the way cricket had been played for 100 years. However, storm clouds were brewing on the horizon. The winds of change were about to sweep the noble game of cricket from its genteel 19th century origins into the modern commercial realities of the 20th century.
Ian Chappell certainly was very instrumental in World Series cricket. He said, if we don't do anything about it now, then the players in another 100 years are still going to be earning the same as what we're earning, and on pretty ordinary conditions as well.
The fact that those 50-odd players kept it quiet for so long, kept it a secret for so long, I think that gives you a clue as to how pissed off the players were with the treatment they were getting from the administrators, not just in Australia, but around the cricket world.
I am a purist, we are purists, and the traditions of the game are very important to us. But from the playing side, what I respected was the blokes that had gone before us had passed on to us the tradition of Australian cricket. It wasn't the Australian Cricket Board that had created the tradition of Australian cricket, it was the players. And, you know, they'd passed on a very healthy game and, you know, great tradition of Australian cricket to us. And I thought it was very important that we pass that on to the next generation. But I also had the realisation that something was wrong. There was an imbalance here, and if the players didn't stand up at some stage or other, there would be nothing to pass on.
When Packer finally came along, you just don't get the whole top of cricket, the top players, to say, yes, I'm for it, I'm off. You know, there's got to be something behind that. And they've been building for a long time and they've just been ignored.
Most of us at World Series time, most of us that took the opportunity, were just gone 30. So you had this great era, Chappell era through the 70s, all those players that are playing then, and you know, all the players from around the world, basically West Indians, and South Africans didn't matter, they would have gone anyhow, and a few Englishmen, but we were all around about 30. A few exceptions, but we were at that stage when we were starting to think about our futures.
One of the things that my father said to me at the time was that the greatest honour, Derek, is to represent your country at a sport and play for your country, and I'm disappointed you're joining World Series cricket. But my decision was a decision which gave my wife, myself, my 2 daughters, security for the future.
I think that every single player in the world who wakes up tomorrow morning should kneel down and say a prayer of thanks for Kerry Packer, and by extension the 55 players that signed initially, but more so for Packer. Because those who don't want to do that may well argue that the money would be there now. But Packer fast-tracked the enormous incomes they're earning, and justifiably so.
I shudder to think what would have happened had it not come along. I shudder to think what would have happened to the game of cricket. I mean, I doubt very much whether the game of cricket would be as healthy, certainly in this country, certainly in England, as it is today. I think it would be a secondary sport almost.
At the time, everyone thought it was the worst thing that happened to cricket. Now, on reflection, everyone realises that it had to happen. It was the best thing that could have happened to cricket. And I think the players of today, I'm sure, realise that without us laying, our head on the chopping block and basically never thinking we'd never play Test cricket again, that I'm sure that they realise that we paved the way for the business it is now, and the fact that players now do very well at it, as they should.
Well, I look at the wealth that's in the game today, and I rejoice in the players of today, with the McGraths and your Warnes and the rest of them. I think it's fantastic. They're great athletes and they're disciplined in so many ways. But I feel that every time Ian Chappell walks past, they should just drop to their knees quickly and say, "Thank you, Ian," and then get up and move on. Because had he not had that courage 30, 25 years ago, they wouldn't have got what they've got today.
Greg to Ian Chappell. And hooked high down to leave him, and over his head, this could be 6.
Willis to Greg Chappell. Going past the bowler, this could be his 50. He's coming down towards the fence, long chase for Lloyd, he won't get to it.
Let me tell you, he bowled quick. He bowled lightning quick.
Nasty ball to not.
I stepped it out at one stage. We were over 30 metres back from the batting crease. It was frightening. It slipped, let alone the poor bugger that was standing between us with a bat in his hand.
I think that was a serious baptism. So sometimes a good hiding is okay.
I don't think you'll have an era like it again. I mean, you look back in the record books and see how many great players played in that time.
It's cricket, it's top cricket. There's plenty of room for everyone. I don't know what the hell all the arguing and bitching was about. I would be very disappointed if we couldn't look back at 3 years and be able to say that.